At the family dinner, my son-in-law threw the dishes on the floor and shouted, "You're not family. My parents are the ones helping us." My daughter agreed. "You're a burden to us." I replied, "Great, then I'm selling the house." The room went silent. They realized their mistake too late. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I spent 3 hours preparing that dinner. 3 hours seasoning the roast, peeling potatoes, setting the dining room table with my late wife's good china, the same plates we'd used for every family celebration since Melissa was born. I wanted everything perfect for my daughter and her husband Philip's visit. At 64, I still lived in the house where I'd raised Melissa alone after my wife Martha died 15 years ago. The same kitchen where I'd helped with homework, packed school lunches, and nursed her through countless scraped knees and broken hearts. Every corner held memories of just the two of us against the world. Melissa arrived first. Her auburn hair pulled back in that severe bun she'd started wearing since marrying Philip. She used to wear it loose, like her mother did. Now everything about her seemed controlled, tighter. "Smells good, Dad," she said, but there was something distant in her voice. She barely glanced at the effort I'd put into the table setting, the candles I'd lit, the flowers I'd cut from Martha's garden. Philip came in 10 minutes later, loosening his tie and immediately reaching for the beer I'd placed in the fridge. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that seemed to suck the air from a room. He'd never been particularly warm toward me, but lately there was something else. Something that felt like barely contained resentment. "Roger?" He nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. That should have been my first warning. We sat down to eat, and for the first few minutes, things seemed normal. I asked about their jobs, their plans for the weekend. Melissa picked at her food while Philip ate in silence, his jaw working mechanically. The tension was thick enough to cut, but I kept trying to make conversation, desperate to bridge whatever gap had opened between us. Then Philip's phone rang. He answered it right there at the table, something that would have earned him a lecture from Martha. His voice grew louder, more agitated, something about bills, about money problems, about how they couldn't afford this or that. "Yeah, well, we sure can't count on any help from here," he said, glancing at me with open hostility. "Some people think family means showing up for dinner and calling it good." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Philip, is everything all right?" He hung up and turned to face me fully, his face flushed red. "All right? No, Roger, nothing's all right." "You want to know what's not all right?" Melissa's hand went to his arm. "Honey, maybe we should—" "No," he cut her off, his voice rising. "I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of these stupid dinners where we sit here and act like everything's fine while we're drowning." I set down my fork carefully. "What are you talking about?" "If you need help, you only have to ask." Philip laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ask? When's the last time you offered anything real? When's the last time you actually acted like family instead of just playing house in this museum?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been supporting them in small ways for years. Paying for Melissa's car repairs, helping with groceries, letting them use the guest room whenever they needed. But apparently, it wasn't enough. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "This is family. This house, this table." "This isn't family!" Philip exploded, slamming his hand down so hard the glasses jumped. The sound of shattering china filled the air as his elbow caught the edge of his plate, sending it crashing to the floor. "You know what family is? Family is my parents driving 3 hours to bring us groceries when we're struggling. Family is real help. Not this fake dinner party bullshit." My chest tightened. The broken pieces of Martha's good china lay scattered around Philip's chair like the fragments of everything I'd believed about our relationship. I looked at Melissa, waiting for her to defend me, to tell her husband he was out of line. Instead, she looked down at her hands and said the words that destroyed me. "Philip's right, Dad. You don't really get what we're going through. Sometimes it feels like you're more of a burden than a help." A burden. The word echoed in my mind as I stared at my daughter. This was the child I'd rocked to sleep when she had nightmares. The teenager I'd stayed up waiting for when she missed curfew. The young woman I'd walked down the aisle just 3 years ago. And now, I was a burden. Philip stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor I'd refinished by hand when Melissa was 10. "You sit here in this house that's too big for you, playing the lonely widower, expecting us to show up and make you feel better about your life. But what do you actually contribute? What do you actually do for anyone besides yourself?" I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing up. The dining room, with its warm yellow walls and family photos, suddenly felt foreign, cold. My parents, Philip continued, starting to pace now, pieces of china crunching under his feet. They understand what sacrifice looks like. They help without being asked. They don't need constant validation or these pathetic dinner invitations to feel important. Each word was a knife. I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. This is your home too, Melissa. This will always be your home. She finally looked up, her eyes wet but her expression hard. That's the problem, Dad. It's always about what you want, what you need. You never asked if we wanted to be here every Sunday, pretending everything's perfect. We have our own lives now. The room spun slightly. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor myself. These weren't strangers attacking me. This was my daughter, the center of my world for over 30 years, telling me I was unwanted, unwelcome in my own home, at my own table. Philip grabbed another plate and let it fall to the floor, the crash punctuating his next words. You're not our family, Roger. You're just someone we're stuck dealing with. My parents, their family. They actually matter. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, surrounded by the wreckage of my wife's china and my relationship with my daughter, feeling something inside me die. Not just my heart, my whole understanding of who I was, what my life meant, what I'd built. They left 20 minutes later, stepping over the broken dishes like they were stepping over me. Melissa kissed my cheek, a cold, dutiful gesture, and said they'd see me next week, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just demolished everything I thought I knew about my place in their world. I sat alone in the silence, staring at the chaos they'd left behind. The roast grew cold on the platter, the candles burned down to nothing, and for the first time in my 64 years, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I really was just a burden nobody wanted to carry. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen until dawn, sweeping up the broken china piece by piece with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Each fragment felt like a memory being destroyed. The Christmas morning when Martha had unwrapped these dishes, tears in her eyes because they were exactly what she'd dreamed of. The birthday dinners, the holiday celebrations, the quiet Sunday meals when it was just Melissa and me after Martha died. Now they were garbage in a dustpan. By sunrise, I'd cleaned everything. You'd never know there had been a disaster in that dining room, except for the empty spaces in the china cabinet where those plates used to live, kind of like the empty spaces in my chest where my certainties used to be. I made coffee and sat in Martha's chair at the kitchen table, the one that faced the window overlooking the garden we'd planted together. The roses were blooming. She would have loved seeing them this morning, pink and white and perfect. But Martha wasn't here to see them. And apparently, neither was the daughter we'd raised to appreciate such simple beauties. The house felt different now, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the silence of abandonment, of being somewhere you no longer belonged. Every room echoed with Philip's words, "You're not our family." Every corner reminded me of Melissa's cold pronouncement, "You're more of a burden than a help." I'd been telling myself for months that something was changing between us, but I'd blamed it on the usual adjustment period after marriage. Young couples need space to find their footing. I'd given them that space, hadn't I? I'd been patient, understanding, supportive. But sitting there in the dawn light, I realized I'd been lying to myself. The signs had been there for over a year, the visits getting shorter and more infrequent. The way Melissa's eyes would glaze over when I talked about my week, my doctor's appointments, my small daily victories and struggles. The way Philip would check his phone constantly during conversations, as if being here was just another obligation to endure. When had I become so small in their lives that my presence was a chore? I walked through the house as the morning light strengthened, really looking at it for the first time in years. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a living room with the fireplace I'd rebuilt when Melissa was in high school, the kitchen where I'd taught her to make Martha's chocolate chip cookies, the basement workshop where I'd helped her build projects for school science fairs. Every room held pieces of our story. But maybe I was the only one who still cared about that story. I stopped in Melissa's old bedroom, the one I'd kept exactly as she'd left it when she moved out for college. Pink walls, cheerleading trophies on the dresser, photos of friends thumbtacked to a bulletin board, a shrine to a girl who'd grown into a woman who saw me as dead weight. That's when the idea first whispered itself. What if I wasn't here anymore? Not in any dark sense. I wasn't thinking about ending anything. I was thinking about beginning something. What if Roger Hawthorne, the burden, the man who wasn't really family, simply went somewhere else? I walked back to the kitchen and pulled out the phone book. Real estate agents. I flipped through the pages slowly. my finger tracing down the columns of names: Henderson Realty, Caldwell and Associates, Premier Properties. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to slow down, to think this through. You can't sell your house because of one bad dinner. You can't uproot your entire life because your daughter and her husband said some cruel things in the heat of an argument. But it wasn't just one dinner, was it? It was months of feeling invisible, unwanted, tolerated at best. It was the growing realization that the most important relationship in my life had become one-sided. I was pouring love into a vessel with a hole in the bottom, and I was finally empty. I picked up the phone and dialed the first number on the list. Henderson Realty, this is Janet. Hi, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'd like to discuss selling my house. Of course. Are you looking to downsize or relocate? Both, I thought. I need a change, I said instead. We talked for 20 minutes. She'd come by Wednesday to assess the property and discuss market value. She sounded excited. Apparently houses in my neighborhood were selling well above asking price these days. The thought sent a strange thrill through me. This house, this burden I'd apparently become so attached to, was actually valuable to other people. After I hung up, I sat in the silence again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, expectant. Like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I spent the rest of the morning in Martha's garden, pulling weeds and watering the roses. My hands moved automatically, while my mind wandered through 35 years of memories in this place. Melissa's first steps on the back patio, the swing set I'd built under the oak tree, the graduation party we'd thrown in the backyard when she finished high school. All those memories felt precious and painful at the same time. I wasn't trying to erase them. I was trying to understand what they meant now that the person who'd shared most of them with me had made it clear she wanted to move on without me. Around noon, my neighbor Helen came to the fence. Beautiful day for gardening, she said, but her eyes were concerned. Everything all right, Roger? I thought I heard some commotion last night. Helen had lived next door for 12 years. She'd brought casseroles when Martha died, helped me figure out which plants needed what kind of care. She was good people, the kind who noticed when something was wrong but didn't pry unless you needed them to. Just some family discussion, I said, not quite meeting her eyes. Ah, she nodded knowingly. Those can be the hardest kind. We talked about the weather, about the neighborhood cats, about anything except the real reason I looked like I'd been hit by a truck. But as she turned to go back inside, she paused. Roger, whatever happened, whatever's troubling you, sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is admit when something isn't working anymore, even when it breaks our hearts to admit it. I looked up at her, this woman who'd watched me raise Melissa, who'd seen me struggle through Martha's death and find my footing again. What makes you say that? She smiled sadly. Because I've lived long enough to know the difference between holding on to love and holding on to pain. And, honey, you've been carrying an awful lot of pain lately. After she left, I sat on the back porch steps and really let myself think about what I was considering. Selling the house would mean leaving the neighborhood, the memories, the life I'd built. But it would also mean stepping away from a situation that was slowly poisoning me. It would mean choosing myself for once, instead of waiting around for people who'd made it clear I was no longer welcome in their world. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in months, I felt something like peace settling over me. Not happiness. This hurt too much for happiness, but a quiet kind of resolution. I was going to do it. I was going to sell the house. And when Wednesday came and Janet Henderson walked through my home with her clipboard and measuring tape, I was going to let her do her job. I was going to price this place to sell quickly, and I was going to find somewhere else to build whatever came next. The decision scared me and exhilarated me in equal measure, but mostly it felt right. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was about to do something entirely for myself. Janet Henderson turned out to be a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach that I appreciated. She walked through my house on Wednesday morning like she was seeing it for the first time, which I suppose she was, but I found myself seeing it through her eyes too. The crown molding I'd installed myself, the hardwood floors I'd refinished, the updated kitchen that had taken me 6 months of weekend work to complete. "This is a beautiful home, Roger," she said, making notes on her tablet. "You've maintained it exceptionally well. The market's hot right now for properties like this. Established neighborhood, mature landscaping, move-in ready condition." Move-in ready. The phrase hit me harder than I expected. This house was ready for someone else's life, someone else's memories. Maybe it had been ready for a while, and I just hadn't been willing to see it. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" I asked. "If you're serious about selling, I'd say we could have it on the market by next week, and with the right pricing, you might have offers within days." Days. The thought made my stomach lurch and soar at the same time. After Janet left, I spent the afternoon going through closets and drawers, starting to sort through 35 years of accumulated life. In the hall closet, I found boxes of Melissa's school papers that I'd saved, every report card, every drawing, every certificate of achievement. At the time, they'd seemed too precious to throw away. Now they felt like evidence of a relationship that no longer existed. I was pulling out a box of Christmas decorations when I found Martha's old address book, wedged behind some winter coats. The leather was worn soft, and the pages were filled with her careful handwriting. Friends, family members, neighbors we'd known over the years. People who'd been part of our world when we were building something together. I flipped through the pages, remembering names and faces. Then I stopped at a section near the back labeled Important Numbers. Martha had written down everything: doctors, schools, emergency contacts, and there, in her neat script, was Philip's mother's phone number with a note beside it. Linda Garrett, very controlling, manipulative. "Discuss," wired Melissa. My hands went still. Martha had met Philip's parents exactly twice before she died, once at Melissa's college graduation, and once when Philip first brought her home. I remembered Martha being unusually quiet after both encounters, but when I'd asked her about it, she'd just said something vague about different personalities. But she'd written this note. She'd seen something that worried her enough to write it down. I stared at the page for a long time, my mind racing. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called Helen next door and asked if she had a minute to talk. She came over with a pot of coffee and that same concerned expression she'd worn in the garden. We sat in my kitchen, and I found myself telling her about the dinner, about Philip's explosion, about Melissa's cold declaration that I was a burden. Helen listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail I shared. "Roger," she said finally, "how long has Philip been saying things like this?" "It's been building for a while, but Sunday night was the worst." "No, I mean, how long has he been working on Melissa, turning her against you?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't think he's deliberately—" "Honey," Helen interrupted gently, "I've been married 43 years. I've raised 3 kids and watched them choose their spouses. What you're describing isn't normal newlywed adjustment. It's isolation. Philip's cutting Melissa off from her support system, making her choose between him and everyone else in her life." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That's a serious accusation. I know it is. But think about it. When's the last time Melissa came to see you alone? When's the last time you had a conversation with her that Philip wasn't controlling or commenting on?" I tried to remember. The engagement party 2 years ago? No, Philip had been there. Christmas last year? He'd been there too, making comments about everything from the decorations to the food. Actually, I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken to my daughter without Philip present or influencing the conversation. "She's an adult," I said weakly. "She makes her own choices." "Of course she does. But Roger, abusers don't usually start with physical violence. They start with emotional manipulation. They isolate their victims from family and friends. They make them doubt their own judgment, their own worth." The word abuser hit me like a physical blow. Philip's not abusing Melissa. He'd never hurt her physically. Helen's expression was infinitely patient. "There are lots of ways to hurt someone, honey, and some of them leave scars you can't see." After Helen left, I couldn't settle. I kept thinking about Martha's note, about Helen's observations, about all the little changes I'd noticed in Melissa over the past 2 years. The way she'd stopped talking about her friends from work, the way she'd started deferring to Philip's opinions on everything, the way she seemed smaller somehow, less vibrant than the confident young woman she'd been before their marriage. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I called Melissa's best friend from college, Amy. I still had her number from the wedding invitation list. "Mr. Hawthorne," Amy sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. "How are you? How's Melissa?" "That's actually what I'm calling about. When's the last time you talked to her?" There was a pause. "Honestly, not since the wedding. I've tried calling a few times, but she always says she's too busy to get together. Philip usually answers her phone and says she can't talk right now." My stomach tightened. "Have you seen her at all?" "I ran into them at the grocery store about 6 months ago. She seemed different, quieter. When I suggested we grab coffee sometime, Philip jumped in and said their schedules were too packed. Melissa just nodded along, but she didn't look happy about it. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Philip wasn't just rude or thoughtless. He was systematically cutting Melissa off from everyone who'd known her before him, everyone who might remind her of who she used to be. The next morning, I called Janet Henderson back. "I've been thinking about the timeline," I said. "How quickly could we move on this?" "Well, if you're really motivated to sell, I could have a photographer here tomorrow for listing photos, and we could be live on the market by Friday. Is there a reason for the urgency?" I looked around my kitchen, at the coffee cup Martha had used every morning for 15 years, at the refrigerator covered with old photos of Melissa at various ages. All of it suddenly felt like props in a play that had already ended. "I just think it's time for a change," I said. But even as I spoke the words, I knew it wasn't the whole truth. I wasn't just selling my house to get away from the pain Melissa and Philip had caused. I was selling it because somewhere deep down, I still hoped that losing me, really truly losing me, might wake my daughter up to what Philip was doing to her. It was a desperate gamble, and I knew it, but it was the only card I had left to play. The photographer came Thursday morning, a young woman with an artistic eye who made my house look like something out of a magazine. By Thursday afternoon, Janet was uploading the listing to the real estate websites. "I have to warn you," she said. "Once this goes live, things might move very fast." "Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Melissa, about the daughter I'd raised to be strong and independent, now trapped in a marriage that was slowly erasing her. I thought about Philip's cruel words, about being called a burden in my own home. I thought about Martha's roses blooming in a garden I might never see again. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." The listing went live at 5 o'clock that evening. By 8 o'clock, Janet had called to tell me we'd already received 3 inquiries and had 2 showings scheduled for the weekend. It was really happening. After 64 years in this town, 35 years in this house, I was finally doing something purely for myself. And for the first time since that terrible dinner, I felt something that might have been hope. The first showing was Saturday morning at 10. I decided to stay in the house during viewings, partly because I wanted to see who might be interested in buying my life's work, and partly because I wasn't ready to hide from what I was doing. If I was going to sell the house that held every memory of raising Melissa, I was going to own that decision completely. The couple who came through was young, maybe early 30s, with a toddler who immediately ran to the window overlooking the backyard. The woman kept pointing out details to her husband: the built-in shelving in the living room, the way the kitchen opened onto the family room, the master bathroom I'd renovated 5 years ago. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she told Janet in a whisper that wasn't really a whisper. The neighborhood, the condition of everything, the yard for Emma to play in. Watching them walk through my house with such obvious delight was surreal. They saw potential where I saw endings. They saw a beginning where I saw the closing of a chapter. Emma, the toddler, ran her tiny hands along the banister I'd sanded and stained myself. And I found myself imagining her growing up here, making memories in these rooms like Melissa had. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, it made me feel something like peace. After they left, I called Melissa. It was time. "Hi, Dad," she said, and her voice had that careful, controlled tone she'd developed lately. The tone that said she was managing me, handling me, the way you'd handle a fragile elderly relative who might cause problems. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you and Philip free for dinner tomorrow? I'd like to talk to you both about something." A pause. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just have some news to share." "Dad, if this is about Sunday night, Philip feels terrible about losing his temper. We both do. Things have just been stressful with work, and it's not about Sunday." I interrupted. "Just, can you come over tomorrow, 6 o'clock? Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear her talking to Philip in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Okay," she said finally. "We'll be there." I spent Sunday preparing like I was hosting my own funeral. I made Melissa's favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables, the same dinner I'd made for every birthday of hers I could remember. I set the table with my everyday dishes, not wanting to risk any more of Martha's china. I even bought a cake from the bakery downtown, chocolate with vanilla frosting, just like Martha used to make. They arrived exactly on time, which should have been my first clue that something was different. Philip looked uncomfortable, his eyes not quite meeting mine when he shook my hand. Melissa seemed nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap and looking around the dining room like she was seeing it for the first time. "Everything looks nice, Dad," she said, and I heard the effort it took her to sound normal. We ate mostly in silence. I asked about their work, their plans for the summer. They gave short, polite answers. Philip complimented the pot roast. Melissa asked about my garden. It was the kind of conversation you'd have with pleasant strangers, not family. Finally, after I'd served the cake and poured coffee, I took a deep breath. "I wanted you both to know that I've decided to sell the house." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Melissa's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Philip's coffee cup froze in midair. "Sell the house?" Melissa's voice was barely above a whisper. "This house? Yes. I've already listed it with a realtor. We had our first showing yesterday." Philip set his cup down carefully. "Roger, if this is about what happened Sunday..." "It's not about Sunday," I said, though we all knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's about what's best for everyone. You both made it clear that this house and my presence in your lives has become more of a burden than a benefit. I'm simply acting on that feedback." Melissa's face had gone pale. "Dad, you can't be serious. This is our family home. This is where I grew up, where Mom..." She stopped, her voice catching. "Where Mom lived, yes. And where you lived until you decided to build your own life with Philip, which is exactly what you should have done. But I don't need to keep maintaining a shrine to the past." Philip leaned forward, his expression intense. "Look, Roger, I was out of line Sunday night. I was stressed about money, about work, and I took it out on you. But selling your house? That's extreme." I almost smiled at the irony. The man who'd told me I wasn't family, who'd smashed my dishes and screamed about how his parents were more valuable than I was, now thought my response was extreme. "I don't think it's extreme at all," I said calmly. "I think it makes perfect sense. You have your own life to live. I should have my own life to live too, and clearly that life shouldn't be centered around Sunday dinners that make everyone uncomfortable." Melissa's hands were trembling. "But where will you go? What about all our memories here? What about Mom's garden?" "I'll find somewhere smaller, more appropriate for a man my age. As for the memories, the ones worth keeping aren't tied to walls and rooms. They're in here." I tapped my chest, "where no one can take them away from me." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken panic. I could see them both struggling to process what this meant. Not just that I was selling the house, but that I was removing myself from their orbit entirely. No more safety net, no more backup plan, no more guaranteed inheritance waiting in the wings. Philip tried a different approach. "Have you thought about what this will do to property values in the neighborhood? If you sell too quickly, too cheaply, it affects everyone else's equity." "I'm not planning to sell cheaply. In fact, the market's quite good right now. Janet thinks we might get asking price or better." "Janet?" Melissa's voice was sharp now. "Janet Henderson, my realtor. She's very optimistic about interest from young families. Apparently houses like this are exactly what people are looking for." Melissa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you just throw away everything we built here without even talking to us first." "I am talking to you, right now. After you've already made the decision. After you've already put it on the market. That's not talking, Dad. That's just informing us that you've decided to blow up our family." Philip put a hand on her arm, but she shook him off. There was something wild in her expression, something that reminded me of the little girl who used to have tantrums when things didn't go her way. "This is still my home too," she said, her voice rising. "I grew up here. I have a right to have a say in what happens to it." "You did have a say," I replied quietly. "You said it Sunday night. You said I was a burden. You said Philip's family was your real family. You made your position very clear." "I didn't mean..." She stopped, realizing that denying her words would be pointless. We all remembered what she'd said, what they'd both said. Philip stood up too, his face flushed. "Okay, fine. Maybe we said some things we shouldn't have. But people fight, Roger. Families have arguments. That doesn't mean you burn everything down." "I'm not burning anything down. I'm simply accepting reality and acting accordingly." "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked at both of them, these two people who'd sat at my table a week ago and told me I didn't matter, and I felt that same strange calm that had settled over me in the garden after Helen left. "It means I'm finally listening to you. You don't need me. You have Philip's parents for support, Philip's family for connection, your own lives to live. You don't need this house or the memories it holds, or the man who's been rattling around in it, trying to stay relevant in your world." Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but they looked more like tears of frustration than grief. "So you're just going to abandon us?" Just like that? The irony was so thick I could taste it. I'm not abandoning anyone, sweetheart. I'm setting everyone free, including myself. We stood there in the dining room where I'd raised her, where I'd celebrated every milestone of her life, where just a week ago she'd called me a burden to my face. The silence stretched between us until Philip cleared his throat. When? He asked. When what? When do you expect to have it sold? Janet thinks it could happen quickly, maybe within the month, if the right buyer comes along. Melissa sank back into her chair like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. A month, she whispered. Maybe less. The couple who looked at it yesterday seemed very interested. And that's when I saw something shift in both their faces. The full reality of what I was saying finally hit them. This wasn't a threat or a manipulation tactic. This wasn't something they could talk me out of or wait out. This was really happening. The house was going to be sold. I was going to be gone. And they were going to have to figure out how to live with the consequences of what they'd said to me in this very room just 7 days earlier. The phone call started Monday morning at 7:36. I know the exact time because I was standing in my kitchen, making coffee and watching the sunrise paint Martha's roses gold, when the house phone rang with that particular shrill urgency that meant trouble. Dad? Melissa's voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying. Can we please talk about this? I didn't sleep all night. What's to talk about, sweetheart? I told you yesterday. You can't just sell the house. This is insane. This is where Mom is buried, where all our memories are. You're being irrational. I set my coffee mug down carefully. Martha isn't buried here, Melissa. She's buried at Greenwood Cemetery, and I'll still be able to visit her grave wherever I live. As for our memories, I thought I made it clear that the good ones are coming with me. But the bad ones, you're just going to let the bad ones drive you away from everything you built? There was something desperate in her voice that I'd never heard before. Not the controlled manipulation I'd grown accustomed to lately, but genuine panic. I'm not being driven away. I'm choosing to go. She hung up on me. The phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time, it was Philip. Roger, man to man, let's figure this out. Melissa's a wreck. She's called in sick to work. She's barely eaten since yesterday. This is killing her. Then maybe she shouldn't have said the things she said. Come on, you know how women get emotional. She didn't mean any of that stuff. She loves you. You know that. How women get emotional. As if cruelty was just a feminine trait I should learn to tolerate. As if my daughter's deliberate participation in humiliating me was something I should dismiss as a hormonal episode. Philip, do me a favor. Don't call me again unless it's to apologize for what you said and did in my home. And I mean a real apology, not this damage control nonsense. I hung up and unplugged the house phone, but they didn't give up. Tuesday morning, I found Melissa sitting on my front porch when I came back from my walk. She was still in her pajamas, her hair unwashed, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked like she had when she was 7 and had nightmares about monsters under her bed. Daddy? The word hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't called me Daddy in 15 years. I sat down beside her on the porch swing I'd built when she was in middle school. What are you doing here so early, honey? I came to apologize. Really apologize, not like Philip tried to do. She wiped her nose with a wadded-up tissue. I was horrible to you Sunday night. We both were, but especially me, because I'm your daughter and I should have defended you. I felt something crack in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the street where she'd learned to ride her bike, where we'd waited for the school bus every morning for 12 years. Because Philip gets so angry when he thinks people aren't supporting us. And lately, everything makes him angry. His job, our finances, his parents pressuring us about grandchildren. I've learned it's just easier to agree with him than to fight about everything. There it was, the admission I'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. That's not a marriage, Melissa. That's not love. That's fear. Her face crumpled. I know, okay? But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to fix any of this. And now you're leaving, and I'm going to lose the only person who's ever loved me unconditionally. The words hung between us in the morning air. I reached over and took her hand, the same small hand I'd held when she crossed streets, when she was scared, when she needed to know someone was there. Sweetheart, you're not losing me because I'm moving. You're losing me because you chose Philip over everyone else in your life, including yourself. I can change. We can go to counseling. I can stand up to him more. Can you? When's the last time you made a decision without checking with Philip first? When's the last time you saw your friends, talked to your old co-workers, did anything just because you wanted to do it? She couldn't answer, and that was answer enough. I love you, I said quietly. I will always love you, but I can't keep pretending that watching you disappear a little more each day is somehow helping either of us. She cried then, really cried. The kind of deep sobs that shook her whole body. I held her on that porch swing while she grieved for the relationship we used to have, for the woman she used to be, for the father she was choosing to push away. When she finally stopped crying, she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. If you sell the house, I'll never forgive you. The threat hit its mark, but not the way she intended. Instead of making me want to stay, it confirmed that I was right to go. Then I guess you'll never forgive me, I said. Wednesday brought a new strategy. Philip showed up at my door with his parents in tow, Linda and Robert Garrett, the people who'd apparently replaced me as Melissa's real family. Linda was a small woman with sharp eyes and an artificial smile. Robert was tall and soft-spoken, the kind of man who let his wife do the talking. I'd met them exactly 3 times, at the engagement party, the wedding, and one awkward Christmas dinner where Linda had spent the entire time explaining how Philip could have done better. Roger. Linda breezed past me into my living room like she owned the place. We came as soon as we heard about this ridiculous house sale nonsense. Clearly there's been some miscommunication. I closed the front door and turned to face the 3 of them. Philip looked uncomfortable, like a child who'd brought his parents to fight his battles for him. Robert examined my bookshelf with polite interest. Linda stood in the center of my living room with her hands on her hips, radiating disapproval. I don't think there's been any miscommunication, I said. I'm selling my house. It's really quite simple. Simple? Linda's voice went up an octave. You're destroying a young marriage over some silly argument. Philip told us what happened. You're punishing these children because they're struggling financially and asked for help. Asked for help. That was an interesting way to describe being called a burden and having my dishes smashed. That's not what happened. But even if it were, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making a choice about my own life. A selfish choice, Linda snapped. A childish, vindictive choice that's going to hurt everyone in this family. I felt my temper stir for the first time in days. Mrs. Garrett, with all due respect, I'm not part of your family. Philip made that very clear Sunday night. Robert finally spoke up, his voice conciliatory. Now, Roger, I'm sure he didn't mean... He meant it, I interrupted, and Melissa agreed with him, so I'm simply acting accordingly. Linda's face flushed red. You're being manipulative. You're using this house sale as emotional blackmail to force them to grovel to you. I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. I'm removing myself from a situation where I'm clearly unwanted. Unwanted? Philip finally found his voice. Roger, that's not... Look, I was stressed. I said some things I didn't mean. Did you mean it when you said your parents are more family to you than I am? Silence. Did you mean it when you said I contribute nothing to anyone's life? More silence. Did you mean it when you destroyed my wife's dishes and told me I wasn't welcome in my own home? Philip's face was scarlet now. Linda looked back and forth between us, clearly trying to figure out how to spin this in her son's favor. Even if Philip was overly emotional, she said finally, that doesn't justify abandoning your daughter. Melissa needs you right now. Melissa made it clear she doesn't need me. She has you now. That's different. We're Philip's parents. You're her father. Then perhaps she should have remembered that before she decided I was too much trouble to deal with. Linda's composure finally cracked. You're a bitter old man, she hissed. And you're going to regret this when you're sitting alone in some depressing apartment, wondering why your daughter never calls. I walked to the front door and opened it. Thank you for stopping by. Please don't come back. Robert headed for the door immediately, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Philip hesitated, then followed his father. Linda stood her ground for another moment, glaring at me with undisguised hatred. We'll see about this, she said. There are ways to stop an old man from making foolish decisions. After they left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about what Linda had said. There are ways to stop an old man from making foolish decisions. It sounded like a threat, but I couldn't imagine what they thought they could do. I owned the house outright. I was mentally competent. I had every right to sell my own property. But I was about to learn just how far desperate people would go to get what they wanted. Thursday morning, I found the first sign of vandalism. Someone had spray-painted "selfish" across my garage door in red letters. Friday brought slashed tires on my car. Saturday, my mailbox was knocked over. Each incident was small enough to be dismissed as random mischief, but I knew better. Someone was trying to intimidate me, to make selling the house more trouble than it was worth. They had no idea how stubborn a 64-year-old man could be when he'd finally had enough. Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after the dinner that had started all this, I called Janet Henderson. "I want to accept the offer from that young couple," I said. "Full asking price, and I want to close as soon as possible." "Are you sure, Roger? We've had 3 other inquiries that might go higher." "I'm sure. How soon can we close?" If their financing is solid, maybe 2 weeks." "Perfect." I hung up and looked around my living room one last time as the man who owned it. In 2 weeks, this would all belong to strangers. The young family with the little girl who'd loved the backyard, who'd seen potential where I'd seen endings, and I would finally be free. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-July. I woke up in my house for the last time at 5:30, made coffee, and sat in Martha's chair watching the sunrise paint the garden gold one final time. The roses she'd planted 20 years ago were in full bloom, pink and white and red, perfect and beautiful, and carrying on without either of us to tend them. I'd spent the previous 2 weeks packing 35 years of life into boxes and deciding what mattered enough to carry forward. Most of Martha's clothes went to charity, but I kept her favorite sweater, the blue one she wore every Christmas morning. Most of Melissa's childhood things went into storage, just in case she ever wanted them again. The furniture, all the pieces Martha and I had chosen together, the dining room set where we'd celebrated every holiday, the bedroom suite where we'd whispered our dreams and fears, all of it was going to the new owners, who'd made a separate offer to buy the house furnished. It felt right somehow. Let this furniture make memories for Emma and her parents. Let someone else's children grow up around these tables and chairs. Let the house keep living instead of becoming a museum to a life that had already moved on. I'd found a small ranch house on the other side of town near the lake. It had 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen with a window over the sink, and a tiny backyard that was manageable for a man my age. The previous owner had been an elderly woman whose children lived far away, familiar story, and she'd left behind a small garden that was overgrown but salvageable. I could see myself there, starting something new. The real estate office was cool and quiet when I arrived at 9. Janet was waiting with the contracts, and so was the young couple, David and Sarah Patterson, with little Emma. Emma was wearing a yellow dress and had a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. She smiled at me when they walked in, the same unreserved smile Melissa had given strangers when she was that age. "Mr. Hawthorne," Sarah said, "we just wanted to thank you again for accepting our offer. We know there were higher bids." "You were the right family for the house," I said, and I meant it. "I hope you'll be very happy there." David shook my hand firmly. "We promised to take good care of it. Sarah's already planning what to do with that beautiful garden." We signed papers for 40 minutes. My signature on each document felt like a small release, a loosening of ties that had held me in place for too long. When the final signature was complete, Janet handed me a check for an amount that still seemed surreal. After paying off the small remaining mortgage and covering fees, I was left with enough money to buy my new house outright and live comfortably for the rest of my life. But more than financial security, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Emma tugged on my shirt as we prepared to leave. "Mr. Roger, will you come visit us in your house? It's your house now, sweetheart, but maybe you could come visit me in my new house sometime, if your parents say it's okay." She nodded solemnly, then surprised me by hugging my legs. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in months. I'd been in my new house for 3 days when Melissa showed up. I was in the backyard, pulling weeds and trying to figure out what the previous owner had planted, when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. I looked up to see my daughter walking toward me, alone for the first time in months. She looked terrible, thinner than she should be, with dark circles under her eyes and that brittle quality people get when they've been crying too much. But she was alone, and that gave me hope. "Hi, Dad." Her voice was small, uncertain. "Hello, sweetheart." I stood up, brushing dirt from my hands. "How did you find me?" "I called Janet. She gave me your address." She looked around the small yard, at the modest house, at the life I was building without her. "It's nice, smaller than I expected. It's the right size for me." We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then Melissa's composure cracked. "I left him. she said, the words rushing out in a single breath. I left Philip. I moved back in with Mom's sister Carol temporarily, just until I can figure things out. I felt my heart skip, but I kept my expression neutral. When, yesterday, after I found out what he did, her voice turned bitter. About the spray paint on your garage, the vandalism. I confronted him about it, and he didn't even deny it. He said you deserved it for breaking up our family. I wasn't surprised Philip had been behind the harassment, but hearing Melissa acknowledge it meant she was finally seeing him clearly. What changed your mind? I asked. She sat down on the small porch step and I joined her. A lot of things, but mostly watching you actually do it, watching you sell the house and move on without us. It made me realize that if my own father, the man who raised me, who loved me unconditionally for 30 years, if he could walk away from me, then maybe I really had become someone worth walking away from. The pain in her voice was real, and it cut me deeply, but I could also hear something else underneath it, clarity. You didn't become someone worth walking away from, I said carefully. You became someone who was letting herself be controlled by someone else. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long time, pulling at the weeds growing through the porch steps. I don't know who I am anymore, Dad. I don't know what I like or want or believe in. For 2 years, I've just been agreeing with Philip about everything. I can't remember the last time I had an opinion of my own. Then now's your chance to figure it out. What if I can't? What if I'm too damaged, too weak? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised to be strong and independent, who'd somehow forgotten her own strength. Melissa, you just left an abusive marriage. You recognized what was happening to you, and you got out. That doesn't sound weak to me. She started crying then, but these weren't the manipulative tears I'd seen lately. These were the tears of someone who was finally, truly sorry. I'm so ashamed of what I said to you, of what I let him say. You didn't deserve any of that. You've been the best father anyone could ask for, and I threw it all away because I was too scared to stand up to my husband. I put my arm around her, the same way I had when she was little, and the world seemed too big and scary to handle alone. You didn't throw anything away that can't be rebuilt, I said, but it has to be rebuilt on new terms. I won't go back to being someone you turn to only when you need something, and I won't pretend to approve of choices that hurt you, even if you're the one making them. I understand. I deserve that. You deserve better than that. You deserve to be with someone who builds you up instead of tearing you down. You deserve to have your own opinions, your own friends, your own life. We sat there on my new porch as the afternoon light slanted through the trees, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was talking to my real daughter again. Not the controlled, diminished version Philip had created, but the smart, strong woman I'd raised. Can I visit you sometimes? She asked. While I'm figuring things out, I promise I won't bring drama or try to move back in or anything like that. I missed you so much, Dad. I missed talking to you, missed feeling like I had someone on my side. You can visit anytime you want, but just you, not Philip, and not anyone else who thinks I should apologize for having boundaries. She nodded. Just me. And Melissa, I want you to consider counseling. Not couples counseling, just for yourself. To help you remember who you were before Philip and figure out who you want to be now. I already called someone. I have an appointment next week. I smiled, feeling genuinely proud of her for the first time in months. That's my girl. We talked until sunset, sitting on that small porch, drinking iced tea and catching up on 2 years of real conversation that had been lost in Philip's manipulation and control. She told me about her job, about friends she'd lost touch with, about dreams she'd put aside. I told her about my plans for the house, about the book I was thinking of writing, about the volunteer work I wanted to do at the community center. It wasn't the same relationship we'd had before. Too much had been broken for that. But it was something new, something honest, something built on mutual respect instead of obligation or guilt. When she got ready to leave, she hugged me tight. I love you, Dad, and I'm sorry it took losing you for me to remember that. You didn't lose me, I said. You found me again. After she left, I walked through my small, quiet house, looking at the boxes I still needed to unpack, the rooms I still needed to furnish, the life I still needed to build. At 64, I was starting over, and instead of frightening me, the prospect filled me with something I hadn't felt in years: excitement. I made myself dinner and ate it at my small kitchen table, looking out at the lake through my window. Tomorrow I would call about getting a part-time job at the library, something to keep me busy and connected to my community. This weekend I would plant some flowers in the front yard, maybe some of Martha's roses if I could find the right variety. And next Sunday, for the first time in 2 years, I would have dinner with my daughter, just the two of us. No Philip, no tension, no walking on eggshells. We would eat and talk and laugh, and I would remember why I'd fought so hard to save her from a life that was making her smaller. I'd sold my house, but I'd gained something far more valuable: my dignity, my peace, and the chance to watch my daughter rediscover herself. At 64, I was finally free to live the rest of my life on my own terms. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the future looked bright. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.